Look at the top of almost every single Fortnite tournament leaderboard, and the unknown player Hris will have almost definitely dealt the most damage and have some of the highest elims. In the words of his duo iDrop, he's never played with a better fighter ever. In this fight, the opponent is below Hris and he has almost no materials to work with. So after replacing this floor, he does a 3-tile edit and swings to the left to hide behind it, which cuts off the line of sight from the opponent. Seeing that the opponent isn't going to make an aggressive play, he sprays the wall once with his burst and uses the momentum of the sprinting and the falling to spray through and slide into the opponent's box, where he attempts to place a cone, but this is blocked by the opponent's ramp. Because the slide kick does 25 structure damage, if an opponent's wall is below this HP, you can actually do this to slide kick phase into their box. But his movement whilst inside here is critical. Whilst replacing the ramp, he slides to the left and jumps, which allows him to swing to the left of the box. Now when a cone is placed inside a box, the left hand side gives you much more vision than being on the right side, plus you can use the cone to peek over, and this just allows him to easily finish the fight. But one thing that sets Hris apart from a bunch of other players is his muscle memory. Now this looks like a cool clip, but there's one thing he does in here that's really important, and that's this micro switch to his shotgun. It's very common for opponents to phase through the floor and get stuck here, and if you still have your builds out at this moment, there is then a little bit of a delay when you try to pull out your shotgun. So by switching to his shotgun before he double edits, he completely gets rid of this delay, which allows him to finish the fight quickly without messing up. Now I know this seems very minor, and it really is. However, this is just really valuable to learn, and it was something I really wanted to mention because this is something I mess up a lot. But an important distinction here is that he only does this when there's a chance that the opponent may phase through the box, as later on he goes to double edit over a player's head, and you notice he does not switch back to his shotgun because there's almost no chance the opponent is going to phase through it. This means he can be much more efficient at piecing up the opponent down below and then killing him afterwards. This is more efficient because when he double edits, he places a floor first and then a cone second, so when he double edits through this, the cone is automatically going to place down below, which means all he needs to do is place 2 walls and switch back to his shotgun. But a really cool thing that he does here is that he jumps back out of the box once he's finished this fight because he doesn't have the back wall behind him. Another cool piece of muscle memory that prevents him being shot in the back from the third player that's in this fight. Later on in the same game, he does something very similar where he double edits down but doesn't actually full piece the opponent as he's on the other side of his wall. But from here, he does an edit that most people would mess up. The issue with standing on a cone and editing a bottom 4 tile is that if the opponent is also standing on a cone, then you can't really shoot their head, so you can't do large damage shots. So as Hris slides the cone into the opponent's box, he crouches, which gives him visibility onto the upper body of the other player, which of course then allows him to finish the fight off. For clips like this, I always think it's really interesting to just watch what this looks like from the other person's perspective, as it's maybe more relatable to me. Now in this clip, Hris does a horrific edit, which you will know if you've watched my editing tier list video, but he does it for a very specific reason. Once he's confirmed this edit, he can see the opponent completely. However, the other player has a much better peek onto Hris, so this edit is bad. But if you watch that video, you'll know that peeking isn't the only thing that matters when you're editing. Here, Hris can make a bad edit because the opponent has just broken through one of the back walls, so the highest likelihood is that he's going to have either his SMG or an AR or his pickaxe out, because he's more than likely going to try and take Hris's wall. So Hris can pretty much make any edit at this point, as he's going to be able to outtrade him since he has his shotgun out. TLDR, timing is much more important than which edit you choose. After hitting for 96, he does a really nice reset where he's then able to cone and completely box the other player. However, because the wall's weak, they are able to take this back. But now, because the opponent is completely boxed, it's pretty obvious that the other player is just going to make an edit play, so Hris just lines up his crosshair and waits for him to do it. But here's what Hris does if he's the one being pressured. But first, if you're interested in improving at Fortnite, I'm happy to announce that I've partnered with my duo Destiny's Jesus to provide weekly group coaching sessions as part of the Solo Superstars. I'm also not the only one, there's also a ton of other pros and coaches in there that you can learn from too. My first session will be tonight, the day of upload of this video at 10 PM UK time. You'll also get access to the Solo and FNCS Masterclass when you sign up, which I am now collaborating with DJ on. All the links down below. But anyway, back to Hris. Now, most people know that you can sprint and edit at the same time, but it's extremely rare that players can actually do this in game. But here, Hris gets himself into a bit of a sticky situation where there's not a single edit he can make on this wall, which is a safe edit. And he's 100 HP, so if he gets shot, he's just gonna die instantly. So from this position, he sprints to the complete opposite side of the box, grabbing the edit on the tile whilst he's around halfway through, which gives the opponent almost zero opportunity to hit a shot into him. Then once he's jammed into that corner, he jumps and finishes off the fight. This position actually happens quite a lot in game, so this is definitely something that's worth practicing. Now he does sprint edit very well, but one thing he does really frequently in almost every single fight is utilize the sprint jump. Now sprint jumping fires you slightly higher into the sky, so that allows you to do some small little peaks like this, even though this clip's kind of stupid because the other player clearly built over his head. But I think this clip right here is an absolute perfect representation of that, because he does 3 different styles of sprint jumps, all of which are super important to master. The first of which is obvious, and you all probably do this. With the nitro splashes equipped, you'll give infinite sprint and a speed boost, so you can just jump, slide to keep an increased movement, and that's how he manages to catch up with the opponent and spray him to open up the fight. This one's obviously very simple, but the second is a micro mechanic that he does a ton. After he fails to cone the opponent, he lands on the ground, and notice he immediately sprints and jumps whilst placing the ramp and then edits through the cone. Now, by doing a side-by-side comparison, you can see that this is just marginally quicker than not sprinting at all, but this is something that Hris does over and over and over again. Pretty much any time he places a ramp, he's just going to sprint jump and then either place a ramp or a floor and a ramp depending on his situation. There are so many scenarios where this is incredibly useful that you absolutely have to start practicing this, and that's where it brings us to our third sprint jump, which is the cone jump. Now, from on top of a cone, you can sprint jump to the layer above you, and you can even do side jumps from cones just by sprint jumping. And this is actually the exact same thing we just showed in the earlier example. Over here, because Hris was sprinting up this ramp when he edited through the cone, this meant that he continued that sprinting because you can sprint and edit at the same time, which meant that once he was on top of this cone, he could sprint, jump, hit a big 86 damage shot, and then catch himself with the floor and full piece the opponent, finishing them off quickly. Now, trust me, this looks really simple, but it's very difficult to actually implement this into your fighting skills and not just continually jump off of height as I usually do whilst trying this. But one more tip is if you're going to do any form of sprint jump like this, always make sure you pull out your shotgun before sprinting, as this will minimize the delay between you trying to take your first shot. I meant to finish this video earlier, but I ended up going away for a week to see my family, and in that time, Hris didn't qualify for FNC's Grand Finals, so that's why he changed his name to Washed 389 if you're wondering. But he did drop a 41 bomb in the Solo Cash Cup Opens. Now, I truly have no idea what this other player was doing, so I can't break that down for you, but there's one really important thing that Hris does here, which is as he takes the jump shot, he not only places a wall between himself and the opponent and a floor to catch himself on, he also places a wall to his left and a floor above him. This is because he has absolutely no information on how many other players are surrounding him right now, so this just blocks off his angle. And this is something that I see a ton of Solo Cash Cup players do wrong, where they just try to think about the player they're fighting, whereas just placing one or two extra builds to either side can help prevent you getting beamed and stop you losing the fight. Now, when he starts to aggress the other player who's just cranking to the height, there's a really cool little mechanical thing he does in this, which doesn't actually lead to him getting any damage. I think this is really interesting. Whilst the opponent is up above him, he actually jumps from behind a floor and places a ramp and a cone and mantles onto it at the same time, which allows him to start elevating whilst keeping completely hidden. Then he yet again sprints, edits, and then blocks off one angle and redirects to a different one, which is super interesting and really nice. I've actually tried this in creative, and what you can do is you can shoot and do this at the same time, but it's kind of awkward, and depending on your binds, you may not be able to mantle whilst placing a cone and a ramp like I can't because it's the same button, unfortunately. But something is still really cool. And then he just kills the guy by running his box of nitro. We love this season. But it's in the next fight, he does something really interesting that I'm absolutely putting into my own personal muscle memory. Now, he gets tagged for a little bit of damage, and he's around 2 tiles below the other player. So here he decides to ramp up and place a ramp diagonally over his head here to block any shots, and sprint jump to go for an angle. Now, unfortunately, the other player is watching him and does manage to block this shot, but this is something I see people getting caught off with all of the time. He then catches himself on the ramp with another ramp over his head and places a floor and does a Marto's classic, which unfortunately his shotgun ends up reloading, but this was basically spot on and maybe would have just killed the other player right here. From here, he does a jumping shooting side jump, which is something I mess up all the time, but the other player actually grabs the wall between the two of them. So when the opponent edits through it, he swings himself to the far left, which completely cuts off line of sight, allowing him to easily finish off the fight. Earlier in this video, I mentioned my video about Fortnite's most overrated edit, so if you want to see which edits to avoid, click this video on screen right now. Also, don't forget to check out Solo Superstars, which is linked down below. Peace!